Hello everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Trends That Barely Last a Fortnight, Keeping Up with Gaming and Gambling and Addressing the Issues for Emerging Adults During COVID-19 with Julie Hynes. We're happy to present this webinar today in collaboration with the Maine Council on Problem Gambling, with funding from the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. We are taking attendance because we're providing a certificate with continuing education credit afterwards. So I'll be running a Zoom report after this is over, and it will tell me how long you were in. So if you log out early, unfortunately that would impact your certificate, so please don't log out early. After today's webinar, I will send you a link to an evaluation. It's very short, and we appreciate your feedback as it helps us understand how we can improve the experience for future participants. I will email you your certificate within about 5 business days. So if you don't have your certificate by this time next week, please feel free to email me. You've gotten several emails from me by this point, so I know you have my email address. Please notice the chat function on your Zoom controls. While Julie's presenting, if you have any question or comment, please feel free to type it into the chat section, and we'll be monitoring it throughout the webinar. So we're very pleased to have Julie Hynes with us today. Julie is the Executive Director of the Oregon Council on Problem Gambling, and we've enjoyed having Julie come to Maine and present for us several times in the past, and we were hoping that we were going to have her here again this spring, but that didn't work out. But given the circumstances, we're very glad that she can join us virtually today to present on this very important, ever-changing topic. So Julie, thanks so much for being here today with us. I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks so much, Lori, and thanks so much, Scott. I really miss New England. Just moved back to Oregon a few months ago, and really was looking forward to heading to Maine, and Portland, Maine is one of my favorite cities. So between the two Portlands, they're both pretty awesome cities. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I want to kick this off with a poll first, so just indulge this poll. So just to kind of get a feel for the sense of the room right now. How tired are you of webinars at this point in COVID-19? And we're going to go through these real fast. All right, a lot of votes. You guys are on it. All right, so we're going to end the polling now with 81% of voting. Only 5% of you are dead tired of webinars at this point, and the bulk of you look like you're somewhat tired and not at all tired, and some of you are bringing on all the webinars. Wow, you guys are really a glutton for punishment with that. So, all right, and let's ask another question. Let's see, question number 2. How would you say your awareness is of gambling disorder? You can and do teach webinars on this topic. It's pretty solid. You don't know a whole lot. And what is gambling disorder? So what do you think about that? You guys are quick voters. Got all these Zoom pros after just a month and a half. Okay, this is very helpful. So with 82% voting, I'm going to end the polling now and share these results with you all. Okay, so 14% of you can or do teach webinars on this topic. So please chat if there's something that you think that we're missing in this. And then some of you say you don't know a lot. It looks like a lot. And then none of you say what's gambling disorder. So that's great. That's very helpful to know. So your level of awareness is all right. So how about gaming disorder? How would you say your awareness is of gaming disorder? You can and do teach webinars on this topic. Pretty solid. Don't know a lot. And what's gaming disorder? Okay, so 80% of you are voting. Let's see what we got here, 82%. All right, so don't know a lot. Okay, that's great. So that's helpful. I think there are many times and many other opportunities also to delve into a little bit more about what is gaming disorder. I think that some of this should cover some of that. And then for those of you who are very familiar, feel like you're pretty solid, the 40% of you, there's still some good stuff in here I think that you'll be able to get. All right, last question. Are you ready to be done with these poll questions? You're okay with polls. Most of you are okay with polls. All right, some of you are pretty done. You live for polls. I think that's Art Mangello on the line right there. I also live for polls. I love all the polls, but we're gonna stop the polls now because we got a lot to cover. So thank you all for your participation in this. It just helps me kind of get a feel for the room, so to speak, as we move forward in this webinar. So with that, having said that, we are gonna dive in. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you being here right now, especially with all of your competing priorities. I know that there's a lot of webinars out there. The fact that you chose this one, I really appreciate it. I know that Scott and Lori have done a lot of work in those last month and a half and been very, very busy. And these are obviously weird times for all of us. I mean, even Tiger King jokes are old at this point. And it's so, you know, it's just webinar fatigue is real. I acknowledge that. And having said that, there's a lot of new content that we have for you this afternoon. So I put in a whole bunch of fresh stuff. So even if you got stuck with the webinar with me before, I hope that you'll find something new that comes out of this. The slide deck will be shared with you following the training. So just please cite slides if you use them, because it does take a bunch of work to put all this stuff together. All right, so here are our 3 objectives that we want to come out of in this very limited time together. 1, describe 3 recent trends in video gaming and gambling. 2, explain how COVID-19 has escalated the need to address this with a public health perspective facing emerging adults. And then 3, identify some practical strategies and tools that you can use in your professional and even personal settings. Especially right now, there's so much personal that's going on that, you know, it's all kind of intermerged, right? So one of the things that I thought was interesting is that in the Scientific American, just a little under 2 months ago, could video games and other entertainment help slow the spread of COVID-19? The World Health Organization, which has now classified internet gaming disorder as a classification in the International Classification of Diseases, version 11, has now even sort of encouraged video gaming as a method to help slow the spread and flatten the curve. There will be some things in here that we talk about in this webinar that could present as a trigger to you. Just do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. We're all adults and we're all in webinars. So if you take care of yourself, get up and look away, feel free to do that. There's no judgment here. So we're diving right in. Objective number 1, we're talking trends. First of all, one of the things that is a common misconception about video gaming is that kids, it's all kids, right? And what we do know is that the average age of a gamer is 33 years old at this point. I mean, even old people like me, I grew up on video games. I grew up on Atari. Maybe some of you also did, but I think especially now with COVID, many of us are also diving into gaming as a practical hobby. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes over time. Percentage of people who are classified as quote unquote gamers under 18 is 21%, and 79% are over the age of 18. Now, when we look at the age breakdown of video game players, we see this sort of breakdown of looking at under age 18 is just a little over 20% of the population. So we talk about emerging adults, we think about millennials, which now are in the upward trend of ages. We don't necessarily refer to millennials as being the emerging adults anymore, but we're looking at that 18 to 35-year-old segment. That carries the bulk of those who play video games. And then you have folks like me that grew up on Pac-Man that are over here in this 36 to 49, and then you have them 50 years and up. And so that's sort of what we're looking at when we think about how gaming evolves and how it really attracts a variety of different age segments. Now, interestingly enough, the other misconception is that only males game. And so we know now that over time that males used to represent the bulk of gamers out there. Even if you look at 2006, you're seeing 62% of male gamers and 38% of female gamers. And now you're seeing that shift enormously, where it's close to a 50-50% breakdown. There are many more games that are enticing to females that are game developers know about. We think about the age and gender issue here. We're looking at the common types of games that 18 to 34-year-olds play are, if you're looking at males, now this is not, this is only 2 genders that they looked at in the study, but we're looking at, for males, action, shooter, and sports games. I don't think that comes as any shock to anybody on this line, that those are more popular with males. So God of War would be an example, Madden, NFL, NBA 2K, FORTNITE, those are perfect examples of those kind of games. Now, you look at the genres for females is more casual and action games. So you think about Candy Crush, Assassin's Creed, Tomb Raider, Sims. There's a bunch of different games that are more attractive to the female segment. Now, that's not to say that females don't play action or sports games, and it's not to say that males don't like some of those other games, but this is sort of the overall breakdown of preference. This is according to the Entertainment Software Association. And the average gamer has been playing for about 14 years. So here's an example of FORTNITE. FORTNITE just this last month had 3.2 billion hours played. So that's just one game and one example. And they just announced yesterday they've hit 350 million players. You look at last year around this time, it was about 250 million players. And this is a game that only launched in 2017. And some people are already saying Fortnite's dead. So there's just so many new games and so much happening, but this is one example. And you see that over 3 billion hours are played in April. You can see just how wild this world is and how consuming it can be. So these are some things for us to keep in mind when we think about gaming. One is the speed of play. The speed of play is ever increasing. It's faster, and it is it's more immersive than it ever has been. And then when we look at gaming, that's one piece, and gambling is also increased in the speed of play. So for example, if we're looking at slot machines, you can play a slot and keep the reels going quick, quick, quick. Same thing with sports wagering. Now we have in-game wagering. Obviously, we don't have many games going on right now, but we also have daily fantasy sports where it used to be a season-long effort. So I want us to keep speed of play in mind, and I also want us to keep in mind is the career motivation. So that we used to hear, those of us who have been in the field long enough in problem gambling, is we used to hear people that wanted to become professional poker players. World Series of Poker was huge. Now more than ever, you're hearing, I'm sure you personally are hearing, I want to be a professional gamer. Among somebody you know, you probably heard that phrase before. Now that there are also college scholarships for gaming, there are much more motivation in terms of looking at gaming as being an actual career. So I want us to keep those things in mind as we move forward. Now, COVID and sports availability. So it's wild right now. I mean, this is ESPN yesterday. I was watching a little bit of the Madden NFL 20 Madden Bowl. Group A that's here, and you know, it's pretty interesting just watching these guys play against each other, and that some people are even watching this, and this was not a thing before COVID hit so much. It has definitely been an accelerant to increase the rate of video gaming being on traditional sports channels. Now, League of Legends was a great example that drew a lot of viewers on ESPN, the League of Legends tournament. But now that we have so few sporting events, traditional sporting events available, except for maybe Korean baseball and Russian table tennis, we've got other sports that are sort of filling the gap. So when we look at that in terms of statistics, revenue loss has just been incredible. I'm going to leave this slide for you to review. I'm not going to belabor it because we've got so much to talk about, but it is such a deficit now in revenue loss that they're trying to figure out ways to fill that gap. So COVID has really shifted even the viewership. This was as of March. It'll be interesting to see when the April data come out. Esports now viewership is 20% roughly of the preferred sports programming alternative. So, you know, then we obviously have the Michael Jordan, The Last Dance documentary that's very popular. So those are some of the other things that are there, but esports is something that we're going to be discussing on this webinar. So if you're not aware of what esports is, this is basically just competitive video gaming, it's professional video gaming. It's very typical to look at esports and go, you know, esports is and label it as this one conglomerate. It's not, it's an umbrella term. Just like traditional sports would be an umbrella term for NBA, for NHL, for Major League Baseball. So that's a typical thing when we look at, when we think about esports is it's a bunch of different sporting events and leagues within esports umbrella. So these are some examples. Apex Legends, Valorant is a pretty new game. It just came out. World of Warcraft, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and the list goes on. And the list keeps growing, and there are more and more esports that keep coming out. And so there are just a ton of different esports that are available to people and a variety of different games to attract people to play and view. So depending on what kind of game you like to watch, you know, many of us don't like to watch golf. Some of us do, and many of us like to watch football. Some people don't. So it's just your preference in terms of what game you want to watch. Some people say, why would you watch somebody else play video games? Well, why would you watch somebody else play a traditional football game. You're not playing. It's because it's entertaining, right? My good friend Cam Adair, who is a phenomenal resource on this topic, says, why would you watch somebody cook on a cooking show? I think that's the perfect analogy. How does it make money? It makes money the same way that traditional sports makes money. So sponsorships, betting, prize pools, merchandise, and ticket sales. Again, I'm not going to belabor the statistics on this. I don't think it's that relevant for you to know exactly how many billions of dollars that this makes. I do think it's relevant to know that it's increasing and that the revenue is crazy amounts of money. So this is as of March. So this is league sports players, leading esports players by overall earnings in millions of dollars. So this guy, No Tail, age 26, he is age 26 this year. He started playing when he was about 15 years old. He plays a game called Dota 2. He has made almost $7 million. So again, how do they make that money? Well, they get sponsorships, they get merchandise, they get ticket sales, they get advertising, they get all the kind of things that you would expect a traditional sports player to get. So streamers are those people who basically demonstrate they're playing the game. So they play the game online, they stream, live stream like we are this webinar right now, and they're sitting in the corner, like kind of like I am now with a better microphone and headset, and they are they always have a gamer's chair, and they're basically playing the game and they're conversing, and they respond to chat boxes, they play the game. So most of the time, the people who are most popular are more entertaining those who play the game, not necessarily even the best at the game, although typically they're really good. So this is most watched Twitch streamers in the last 30 days. Now I just pulled this up this morning just to kind of get a very, very recent picture of what this looks like. So this is one streaming method. So Twitch, much like ESPN, you would have NBC Sports, you have a variety of different traditional sports channels. Well, Twitch is one of those sports channels. YouTube's another one. Microsoft has another one. So this is one. So of Twitch, you see that Anomaly has 42 million viewer hours in just 1 month. This is one player on one method of viewership. Why this matters when we think about emerging adults is we now know it's a sanctioned high school sport. It depends on what sport and which school, but esports is now an officially sanctioned high school sport by the National Federation of State High School Associations. We also think about Maine. Maine, you've got esports in your colleges, you've got community college, you've got Thomas College and having esports. So there's a whole new world out there, and there's also a world of even scholarships that are now forming. These are not yet NCAA sanctioned scholarships, but they are a variety of different opportunities to get scholarships. What I thought was so interesting is when I looked at the scholarships.com website, it says, all those nights, long nights, staying up until 2 a.m. to play video games can finally pay off. Wow. So that's where we are, guys. So when we take a look at how many people, though, are betting on esports, because that's relevant to our conversation about gaming and gambling. So how do people bet on esports? How many people are doing it? And what are they doing? So one of the studies that was just conducted, it was the largest study of its kind in the United States, was the National Survey on Gambling Attitudes and Gambling Experiences, commissioned by the National Council on Problem Gambling, came out last year. Incidentally, 11% of sports bettors had placed a bet on esports. Now, the interesting thing here is that was largely before most legalized forms of gaming, of sports betting came out in the United States, for one. And two, it was pre-COVID, before things actually really even more started to blow up. So it'll be interesting to see how this leverages over time. Is it legal to bet on esports? That's the question of the day for a lot of people. So for many states, including Maine, obviously you have some bills that stalled, right, at least in this current legislative session, like many other states because of COVID hitting. But in some states, they actually specify, no, you cannot bet on esports. That's Indiana and Pennsylvania. Now, if you're in Jersey, if you're in Ohio, if you're in Colorado, Nevada, or Tennessee, yes, that laws say that, yes, you can bet on esports. Some laws are silent. For example, in Oregon, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But since legalized traditional sports betting is so limited, i.e. again, Russian table tennis, then we've had to shift over into different types of betting. So one of these things is iRacing. iRacing has been one of the kind of hallmark ways of legalized sports betting in the United States. and there will be more that are coming. But because of COVID, US sports betting operators are kind of behind the curve, honestly. Their laws were behind the curve. Many states didn't have it together. They didn't really specify whether they were going to allow esports betting. They didn't even know what esports betting is. Let's face it, it's a bunch of old white dudes in the legislature, and a lot of them don't know what's going on with esports. So I want to send an example here about what it's looking like currently. So this is Oregon Lottery Commission. Just a couple weeks ago, they had their Lottery Commission meeting, and they're like, oh, wait, we didn't really think about esports before. We're not really sure that we want to offer it. We don't understand it. We're not sure about the age groups and all of those other kind of things and regulations. So they were skittish about esports previously. And then they started thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to fill the gaps? We've got this revenue loss like every other jurisdiction in the United States. What are we going to do? So they know that NASCAR launched iRacing, and they know it's growing in popularity. And they know there's different other types of launch. ESPN is airing Madden, Rocket League, NBA 2K. So there's so much going on in the mainstream now that they're thinking, maybe we should do this. And so they have started with iRacing as an example. Now, we expect overall that esports betting will become more common over time. So you might be asking, well, what exactly is it? I don't understand what you're talking about on betting on esports. So let's look at that. Let's look at several examples. One is direct competition, much like you would bet on a traditional NBA game. Another is with online. You would bet similarly, but just do it online. Fantasy esports, loot boxes and other microtransactions, and skins. So we're going to dive right into some of these, and we're going to breeze through them somewhat quickly because many of you have already very familiar with skins and loot boxes. Some of you are like, I don't know what a skin is. I don't know what a loot box is. So we're going to try to meet in the middle. Now, before we go there, I want us to keep three things in mind. For those who are not well-versed in the world of gambling, there are really the three things in which we consider something to be considered gambling. Prize, so something's on the line. Chance is that element of risk. Not sure about the outcome. And three is consideration. So it's requiring money or some significant effort. Now, these three things together equal gambling. The fantasy sports industry is a perfect example of saying, we're not chance, we're skill. So we're going to look at these three things because these three things together are really relevant when we blur those lines between gaming and gambling. All right, so what does it look like? So this is a typical example on the left, a League of Legends Championship Series. Draws a lot of people just like you would a traditional sporting event. You could bet on it just like you would any traditional sporting event. Current offerings right now, you have things like iRacing and Madden, NBA. The NBA 2K tournament that was held recently did not have any US operators that were holding that bet, but there are a lot that are growing again to that point of being behind the curve and trying to catch up. Now, volume by game. So this is kind of interesting is that most people have bet on League of Legends, and the second most popular game to bet on would be Counter-Strike Global Offensive. So it's okay if you don't know the acronyms, it's fine. Then we have Dota 2 and StarCraft, and then other. So these are the most popular games to bet on. And if you look at fantasy esports, so for those who are familiar with fantasy football, with fantasy baseball, basketball, etc., it is very similar. You have real players in which you are, I want to say the word wager. It's arguable in the industry, but we're kind of all getting there where we're determining that, yes, it is indeed gambling. But you put your money on the line and you do it with real players. So if you're creating a fantasy football team, for example, you would get Tom Brady from now the Buccaneers as your quarterback. You would get wide receivers. So you want Julian Edelman of the Pats. You pick all these real players and all the real games that are upcoming, put them together as your fantasy team under a certain salary cap, and then go from there. So how this works in esports is you're also doing it on real players over the real game. So right now, as of today, if you go to DraftKings.com, you can see where it is circled. These are some of the games that are out there. And on the right, if you want to get the slide deck later and check this out, these are the games that they offer. So Counter-Strike Global Offensive, League of Legends, iRacing, Call of Duty, and Rocket League are all available now on DraftKings. As recent as a couple of months ago, it was really, by all intents and purposes, just League of Legends that was being offered as a fantasy esport, but they've just jumped on to try to get as many people entering as they can to try to make up that lost revenue. So that's direct competition and fantasy esports. And then we get into microtransactions. So microtransactions basically, you know, you're paying real money for a virtual prize. Candy Crush is a great example of it. Many of us know about Candy Crush. By the way, it made $22 million last month. Wow. It is a ability to get something within the game to advance your play, to hopefully advance your play, or it could be an ability to get something that will just look cool in the game. So those are microtransactions. Now, one of the most commonly known forms of microtransactions that has drawn a lot of controversy is loot boxes. So a loot box is essentially you pay a little bit of small virtual currency or real money, and you try to get something cool. So this is Overwatch, an example of a loot box in action. So hold on to your hats and your thoughts about this, because think about the dopamine release that's coming here, the anticipation of reward. There's a lot going on, and we're going to look at the research about how that affects people a little bit here. So that's basically a loot box. Now, loot boxes are in most video games. They are, again, you're trying to get something better out of the box. You're trying to get something either rare, or a character that's going to help you in a game, or a weapon that's going to help you advance in the game, or just something cool like a skin. We'll look at skins in a minute, by the way. But loot boxes are in, if you look at even the mobile devices, they're in about 6 out of 10 of the games in Google and Android, in Android and iPhones. And then most games that feature loot boxes are deemed suitable for ages 12 and up. So just something to keep in mind there. But as of very, very recently, just this last month, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board has now had to place a label on items that contain loot boxes. So previously, they didn't have anything about loot boxes at all. Then there was this uproar. People were ticked off. They're like, this is gambling. You're taking a bunch of kids' money and adults' money. And they said, this is in-game purchases. So they included in-game purchases. And then most recently, they said, oh, we're going to call it include random items. So that's what they're calling it now, is includes random items. So if you see that there, it basically means that it's a loot box. Some jurisdictions have outlawed them entirely outside the United States, but many of them are continuing. Some, like Rocket League, have voluntarily taken out loot boxes. But this is now the label that has been slapped on the Entertainment Software Rating Board, saying, okay, people, here you go. So skins betting is really big too. Now, what is a skin? We'll take a look at that in a second. It is really growing. And I think some people thought, well, this is not so big of a deal. I think kids were doing it, now it's gone away. But it's looking at, this is as of 2016. So this is a total value of items wagered on skidded betting sites as of 2016. This was before things got even bigger with skins. I don't have the recent data, I haven't seen it on what is actually being spent as of this last year, but a monthly is $618 million and annually $7.4 billion bet on skins. So you can take a look at what types of those are being wagered on your own in the slide deck. But if you're wondering, well, what the heck is a skin? Basically, it's this. It's a weapon decoration. So on the left, you have an original weapon in a game. And then on the right, you have skins for the original weapon. So there's designers that create these things. They slap them on virtually. And then a lot of times they are very rare and draw a lot of interest. And they are a commodity within games. So I like to say, think about them as virtual sneakers. Okay. So a lot of people collect sneakers. Sneakerheads, they like their sneakers. They don't necessarily make you better, faster, jump higher, unless you have the old Reebok pumps. I just aged myself. There are a lot of different sneakers that people collect, just like there are a lot of different skins that people collect. It's just a digital version of something that you collect. It doesn't help you necessarily at all in the game. It's just a decoration and to look cool. There's a lot of games that have them. What's interesting is how it's wagered on. So I'm going to go back another slide here, because what I want to do is take a look at one site. This is called opskins.com, and they allow you to trade skins. You can also purchase skins. So what happens is that somebody collects a skin, and they basically can trade it for real money off of the actual website. It's a third-party website, which somebody trades their skins for virtual currency. And then oftentimes what they'll do is they'll take their own skin, so their own decorated weapon, and they will put it out there and say, I'm going to put my virtual decorative weapon here and try to get something better. So prize, chance, consideration. You're hoping to get something better. You know there's an element of chance. Sometimes they are like lottery games, they're spin games or roulette games, a variety of different ways in which they are. Consideration, you're putting something on the line, either it's money or something of value. So that's your like 30,000 foot really super crash course in skins. We could go for a while about this very topic. So what's interesting is a couple of weeks ago, Counter-Strike Global Offensive Empire, which is one of the skins sites, said, we're now a skin marketplace. You can trade skins with 0 fees with 0 wager requirements. So your admit of it is wagering then. Interesting. How the spending occurs. So some people might wonder, how do people spend on skins? I don't understand. When you go to a kiosk at a grocery store, or you go to Target, you buy those gift cards. Grandma sends a gift card or a debit card in the mail. That also works too. So there are a variety of different ways that in-game currency can be translated to bet on these things. So these things don't end up on bills. So many times people don't see them on bills because they just show up as a Steam purchase, or they just show up as a Nintendo purchase. So these are things to keep an eye on. Let's take a quick break, y'all. We're flying, right? I did have 2 cups of coffee. It's still morning for me. All right, so how does this affect our world now? We're in public health crisis, obviously, with COVID. I want us to think about several things when we're looking at how these trends are affecting us today. I think of it as gaming being the campfire and COVID being the accelerant. We have just catalyzed our digital world. You all know, right? I mean, how many of us were on regular Zoom webinars before this? We were, but not as frequently. Some of us didn't even know about Zoom. It was just a thing that you would think about when you rev a car. And so we have changed so rapidly, and our gaming world has even evolved so rapidly since COVID hit. So we think about the several things that we are dealing with right now. Isolation. I even read this story yesterday, and I thought it was just so relevant about how when we're connecting with each other on Zoom, how it feels like we're connecting, but we're actually like not. So we're actually kind of more isolating, because then it kind of makes us miss actually seeing people even more. I don't know. I think we're all over the map with how we feel about things like this. But in general, there's a lot of isolation going on right now. A lot of boredom going on right now. I can't tell you how many times my 10-year-old comes up to me in a day and says, Mom, what can I do now? Mom, what can I do now? Mom, what can I do now? So it is something where we're all dealing with this. We're all in the same boat right now. There's less opportunity for those connections with competition in terms of traditional sports. We're encouraged not to be out on the basketball court, even tennis, things like that. So there's just that less opportunity for people. And think about when we like competition, how are we going to get that outlet? Unless we're self-competitive, oh, I'm going to do more burpees today than yesterday. We're really not having that outlet that we need. So some people get that outlet from video gaming. I had former athletes that would get injured in my University of Oregon class that would report when they got injured, they would spend a lot more time playing video games because they get that's their competitive outlet. So think about how COVID's hit with that. And then teens, parents are often working. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to babysit you all day. So, or, you're bored. I get it. So a lot of times kids play video games, and then there's less schoolwork too. So what's filling that gap? And then young adults, unemployment is real. And so when people are unemployed, many times they're filling that time with their video games. So these are a lot of things for us to consider. There's a lot of public health implications, obviously, to us, more than just video gaming and gambling and those concerns, but these are real things to consider. And we have seen, even this is March, the April data have not come out yet, but this is just of March. You look at this called Steam. Now, Steam is a vehicle to play video games, much like Xbox is and PlayStation is. And there are a lot of different games on Steam, but this is a Steam Counter-Strike Global Offensive only. Okay, so concurrently seeing Counter-Strike Global Offensive only is just way up in March. I mean, it's just exploded. So how can we think about this when we think about young adults? Obviously, I think most of us know by now that the brain is still developing till age 25. Their prefrontal cortexes are still developing. Their impulse control is not yet developed. Their decision-making long-term is not yet developed. And so it's really important when we look at this from a lens of emerging adults that we think about brain development as being crucial when we look at how this is affecting them long-term, because they're susceptible to dopamine. Dopamine is very, obviously we all have a level of dopamine when we get excited about something, but it's not released when somebody this is an example. I keep showing the slide. I know it's old visually, but it is something that's really relevant because it's not about the money. Now we think about people who have problem gambling. They oftentimes say, yeah, it's about the money, but it's not. And I apologize if this is a redundant topic for people, but when we're expecting a loss, we're not excited, where our dopamine isn't released. So but I'm not going to play the Powerball because I'm going to lose anyway. But if you're excited about winning, if you have that hope, it's that anticipation of the reward that is the thing. And it's the same with gaming, which is why when we finish a level, we're like, okay, cool, I finished the level and I want to keep playing. It's the same thing with gambling. So it's really about that rush. It's about that dopamine release. There's also stuff about serotonin. There's all sorts of neurotransmitter involvement. But dopamine, when we look at this, it's really about that anticipation of that reward, no matter whether it's gaming or whether it's gambling. Now, whether it's gaming or gambling, it's not necessarily always harmful. And that's one thing where we talk about kids in video gaming, and it's like some people just put it in a good bucket or a bad bucket. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on with personality, with peers, with pro-social stuff in video games that we could get into. But in general, it's not something that's necessarily itself risky, but it can become problematic, and it does become problematic. So problem gambling and gaming disorder, most of us would consider these both to be on a very similar continuum. The World Health Organization came out with the official blessing as gaming disorder of being in the International Classification of Diseases, volume 11, and that's coming out. So it is something that is now official. It's an official condition. It's official diagnosis. And Nancy Petrie, props out there to those folks in Connecticut. Nancy Petrie did a lot of research on internet gaming disorder, and so does Mark Potenza, also out of Connecticut. But what she did and her colleagues did was crosswalk gaming and gambling criteria. And what they found was very similar conditions, or the very similar symptoms, if you will. So I'm going to go back here. You can actually look at this entire article if you want to. All these things are linked for you for your viewing enjoyment. But the same criteria. So gambling and gaming, they both have this level of tolerance. You need more and more of it. You're preoccupied with it, have to do it more, using it to escape, hard time to quit, irritable when cutting back, chasing losses. All of these things are very similar. And then we know in between the two issues that they're very sensitive, less sensitive to loss. So, okay, I lost. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. More reactive to gaming and gambling cues. So things that they wouldn't normally, many people don't normally register. They're like, oh, this is exciting. I can gamble on it, or I can game with it. And then make more impulsive choices. Those are some commonalities with those. Now, when we look at games that involve microtransactions, otherwise known as freemium games, the research shows that adolescents who played simulated gambling games are more likely to move to real gambling, and then more likely to have later gambling problems. And also loot box research. So rare loot box opening triggers it triggers arousal and rewards responses. So that loot box that we talked about earlier and we looked at opening, it's that triggers that arousal and wanting to do it more. There's more of that greater urge to do it. Most gamers have opened loot box, and then paying for loot boxes has been linked to problem gambling. Now looking at skins, we're seeing much higher rates of those who had bet on skins of having higher risk, at risk, and problem gambling than those who did not bet on skins. And they also had greater breadth of gambling involvement, meaning they bet on more games. Now, why they keep playing. Fear of missing out in a lot of ways, right? I mean, we all know this. I don't think it's a big revelation on this webinar. But they also want that in-game rewards, street cred, looking good with their friends. It's wanting achievement, right? We all need some kind of achievement, especially now with COVID. If we're not feeling like we have something to achieve, that the games can present that opportunity for us to get something. And then inadequacy, keeping up with your friends. So, and the game doesn't end. So, you know, unlike a game like Donkey Kong, where you lose your 3 lives and you're done, the game continues on and on and on. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, has a lot to do with this too. So emotional dysregulation that comes out of ACEs. So the difficulty of regulating emotions, and then what do we do out of that? And then, you know, alcohol use disorder, compulsive eating, disordered gambling, substance use. So there's so many other disorders, but I want us to also remember that problem gambling is one of those. There's also just a ton of risk factors that we can look at too. I mean, the bottom line here is that there are so many commonalities in these two issues, gaming and gambling disorder, that when we address them, we can address them very similarly. So that's really the bottom line. The research is showing it to be true. I think most of us who are aware of these issues, we see it to be true. Many people who are recovering from gambling disorder are getting highly involved into games like Candy Crush or other games as a substitute. So let's think about that with that lens when we think about helping people. Another quick break. Are you breathing? I'm trying to breathe, but I know we're rolling through this quick because we got to talk about what's next. What do we do? So we know that all these trends, especially now with COVID, have hit. It's the gasoline on the fire, the gaming fire, and we know that there are a lot of risks involved here. So what? All right, so the common thing that I typically hear from people, all right, well, my kid or my niece or my so-and-so or my student wants to be a professional gamer. That's the common story, right? You hear that a lot. We hear it a lot more than ever. All right, great. So what do? Hey, finish your homework and chores. You still got to do that. Practice similar time period to traditional sports. So remember back when we talked about that playing until 2 a.m. is finally paying off? Well, basketball players don't go out and play usually 9 or 10 hours a day, right? They have their certain practice time. If they're in school, they have their certain practice period that they do. They have their practice, their coach sets them off. And maybe they have to go running on the weekend. Maybe they have to do some other exercises here and there, but there's that time period. And so that's crucial when we think about somebody who wants to become a professional gamer, is talk to them about that. Maintaining good sleep hygiene. We hear all the time about, well, he or she gambles until 4 in the morning, goes to sleep, wakes up at noon, starts all over again after they've had Taco Bell. We hear it all the time. So that comment that sleep hygiene is very important. Obviously, all of us know the public health implications of limited sleep. So keeping a good schedule is crucial. And then nutrition. So traditional athletes have to keep up with nutrition, and they have to eat healthy, because if they don't, they're usually slogging down the court like Shaq. And if they don't practice good nutrition, they're typically not performing that well. So we got to think about this. If you're looking at this and being professional, you've got to look at this as in that lens. And by the way, esports leagues also have psychologists, physical trainers, nutritionists. So they're treating this very, very similarly to traditional sports. So at home, if you're hearing that, or at school or virtual school or counseling, wherever your setting is, these are some possible responses. And I'll keep an eye on the chat box too for that, if you have your own suggestions for that for professional gamers. So as I just pointed out too, we want to use the same strategies that are effective in your work. You don't have to know who won the Call of Duty tournament recently. You don't have to know all the details about all the skins. You just need to know that these are very similar, right? They're similar to the issues that you already typically treat. If you think about tolerance, if you think about preoccupation, if you think about escaping, if you think about irritability when cutting back, you think about all these things, you plug those into substance use disorders or whatever you might be dealing with your clients, if you're a clinician or if you're a preventionist. It's all the same. It's all connected. All the risk factors appear to be the same. and the protective factors do as well. And the way to help people is largely the same. There are some small differences. If you want to look at some great material that's already out there in the domain, I would recommend, this is for teens and not necessarily young adults, but underage gambling facts and stats are available, teen gambling warning signs. This is Change the Game Ohio. They have great resources that are really straightforward. I think the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling also has some good resources that they have. So just wherever you're at, you can even Google this and find out gaming, teen gaming, educational materials. There's not a whole lot out there yet. So we're all in the same boat together where we're developing this. And oh yeah, obviously, Caitlin Brown, Connecticut. So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot out there, but you guys are doing this work. We're all in this together where we're trying to create these materials as we go along. Now we want to watch for those key signs, even during COVID. Obviously we're isolated. Obviously there's more screen time, but increased isolation, they're hiding the phone or device. All of a sudden that gift card that grandma sent for the birthday is suddenly gone. Where did that go? So these are some things that we have to look out for. Even during COVID, we'll see these signs. I mentioned Cam Adair earlier. Cameron Adair is his name. He founded a great organization. Many of us have already heard of it. Many of us have already had him out in our jurisdictions to talk. He's incredible. GameQuitters.com. Most of the resources are free. There are some membership options as well. What he does is he doesn't just talk about quitting gaming, excuse me. He talks about what to do instead. So he actually has this great website where you can even sign up and just say, here's what I want to do. I'm a person who likes adventure. I'm going to plug this in. There's a lot of suggestions that come up as alternatives to gaming, many of which are not available right now because of COVID, but some of them are. And he has a video, I think it's around, I want to say half an hour long, about navigating screen time and gaming during coronavirus. And he has his associate there, also a New Englander, I believe, and the coronavirus crisis, they talked together about navigating screen time and gaming. I think her name is Nadja. Gosh, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name off the top of my head. Gaming during COVID-19. So let's mix it up. Mix up the opportunity for gaming with also social connection time. You know, I'm a parent too, and I'm going through this too. It's rough. Right? I mean, we're just trying to navigate it all. It's a lot overwhelming. And at the same time, my kid gets online with his friend and they actually have the video chat going on while they're playing. So they're still connecting with one another. That's an opportunity. That's one example. And then, you know, doing video chats, other stuff to be able to play besides just gaming. Using media together, it's a good opportunity to monitor. That's if you have a teen, not necessarily if you have a over 18-year-old. That would not go over so well around that. But let's give ourselves a little bit of grace right now. It's a weird time. It's stressful. We're going through a collective trauma. And it's okay if we're not having our usual specific guidelines. We want to try to keep the schedule as much as we can. These are some other options for looking at apps, websites, video games for either pro-social, physical, mental stuff to keep motivated with other forms of gaming rather than just more of a passive sort of gaming. There's mindfulness apps. I'll check the chat box if you have any suggestions on those. A lot of mindfulness apps that are out there. Many of us are already using them. Stress reducers. I just downloaded Sanvello, which is it's an interesting app. It really is. It's very interactive. It offers now, because of COVID, free membership for a while. So this is a screenshot, and they talk about here, staying strong, coronavirus, how are you feeling, all that kind of stuff. So just sort of more proactive health promotion kind of things that really are trying to help during this crisis. Exercise apps, if you can't get out and exercise, and if it's snowing in late April, for example, you're probably pretty tired of it. But there are some apps that a lot of people are using too. Actually, my former Taekwondo school, their instructor is actually doing classes online right now. He's by himself in the studio and sort of demonstrating, does Facebook Live every day. So there's a lot of ways to mix it all up right now. In recovery, you are the people that can help the most. Thank you for what you do, because without you, none of these apps would make a difference. You're the people that really drive the issue home, that really connect personally with people, that really understand them and tease out their needs. So without you, you know, again, none of these things would make a difference. So there are some things that we use as supplements for help. Smart Recovery is one of them. It's great. It is interactive. They're real people. And, you know, there's National Council on Problem Gambling has their helpline, which is available all 24/7. A chat is available. Gam Talk has chat. Gamblers Anonymous now has moved to conference calls. So again, these are all links for you to check out later on your own time. If gambling, there's Gam Block and Gam Ban are a couple of those tools that people use to block gambling sites. I haven't seen anything yet that will block gaming specifically. Kind of good luck, good night with that. That's pretty rough. For family members, this is also for personal use too, is Chess Health has released an Envoy app, which is, it's an app that will work for people that are either trying to recover from substance use disorder or even for family members, for support for family members. So these are, again, these are not all for gaming or gambling, but they are very helpful. And I think because of so many things in this crosswalk, it's all connected. I think they will help. In closing, before we get to our questions, always got a Brene Brown because I love this woman. She has a new podcast called Unlocking Us. I think it's phenomenal. You know, she's always talks about shame and about vulnerability. And one of the things that I love is that she's always talking about connection. Because at the bottom line of all this stuff, we need to be connected. With isolation comes a lot of hard stuff, right? So staying connected with others, we're hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives us purpose and meaning in our lives. And without it, there's suffering. And even during COVID-19, just being able to appreciate the fact that we can still stay connected together in this walk that we're dealing with. So with that, I'm going to pause. Whew. Let's take a deep breath together. I know that was a wild ride there, but I think there's just so much going on right now, guys, that it's just, it's a strange world, and we're in this together, and we can address it together. I have a lot of hope, and I hope you do too. So I'm going to check over on the chat box. Ellen, thank you for that. Skins are also character decorations. Can change the outfit or entire appearance of your player. Yes. So like Sims is a great example of that. Sims video game where you can, like, you know, change your clothes, you can change furniture. Fit On, Ellen says, is great free fitness app. Yes, yes, that's a great point. Fit On, okay. So, hey Fred, I miss you, man. Okay, Liz says, what are some of the best gaming resources? I think if you start with Game Quitters, that would be a really good start. There's also a website called Online Gaming Anonymous, OLGA. That is another one. But for those who are sort of getting a start with gaming, I cannot recommend Camadera enough, the gamequitters.com, because there's so many resources. He's always putting out new videos, always coming up with new ideas, always interacting with people. There is a Facebook group that he also hosts that many people post on. They discuss not only their problems, but also potential solutions. So that is another resource, hopefully for you. Christine, I'm a social worker working with a family with a young teen son who is addicted to gaming to the point of getting violent, etc. Suggestions or resources. Okay, so this is an area, right, where especially when we deal with late teen years, where now this is not judgmental at all. Typically what will happen is that over time, the teen hasn't had necessarily the structure and boundaries around the gaming activity. We would typically recommend that from a prevention perspective of starting early. So let's just assume that this young person is now playing so much, they will not stop, and to the point of getting violent. Suggestions or resources. So at this point, I mean, I would ask if you're working with the parents as well around discussion around that. It might be a situation in which going cold turkey is not necessarily an option for him. There are a couple of inpatient centers in the US. There's one that's called Restart in Washington State. Please shout out if you know of others, but there are specific gaming counselors also in various jurisdictions. Yes, work with parents, definitely no cold turkey, right. Yes, so talking about things that they might be able to do within the guidelines of what you would typically recommend for other behaviors. Some parents will actually remove the controllers for, say it's a PS4 and Xbox, they'll actually remove the controllers and only allow a certain amount of time. Obviously, with a violence piece, you also have to ask if they are a danger to themselves or others. That's, you know, obviously as a social worker, you're well aware of what to do with those tools. So let's talk more, Christine. How, any other thoughts anybody else has around that? I want to keep in mind our time. I also used to be a counselor, so I'm very comfortable with awkward silences. So I'm just waiting for something in a chat box here. Definitely game quitters for parents and Christine. Yes, yes. Thank you, Lori. Thanks, Christine. I'm a school counselor and have similar questions and issues. I think this is a huge issue and parents want help. Absolutely. And each system has their own set. I think trainings for parents on how parental controls work would be awesome. Oh man, that is so true, Nicole. So that every device, every single operating system has its own parental controls. I know that we were dealing with that here with Xbox. Some of them are really hard to figure out. I would recommend, honestly, YouTube videos. They are great from cutting hair to fixing a furnace to understanding parental controls. Go onto YouTube and ask, how do I set up a parental control for my iPhone? How do I set it up for my other device? Because if you just go onto like your mobile carrier, not that helpful. YouTube's where to go. Hey, Shirley, miss you. All right, so at this point, it's 10:57. I would like to say, again, thank you so very much for spending your time here today, because you have a lot of other stuff going on. I really appreciate you being here and being a part of this conversation today. Please keep in touch. I miss y'all out there on the East Coast, and happy to be here at Oregon as well, but we all are in this together. If you have resources, none of us are the experts, so let's stay in this together. And I'll pass it on back to you. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much, Julie. We were so happy to have you with us today. We wish you were in person, but hopefully soon, right?
Yes, yes.
And thanks to everyone that joined us today. If you have any further questions or comments, I will be sending out the evaluation link later today. Also, feel free to shoot me an email anytime. And if today's topic really caught your interest and you weren't familiar with a lot that Julie was talking about, I would suggest following some Facebook or Twitter feeds. One would be the Oregon Council on Problem Gambling, AdCare Maine, and the Maine Council on Problem Gambling, as well as Game Quitters. I'll actually include those suggestions in the email that I send you with the evaluation link, just for your ease in finding us. We do spend a lot of time reading articles and trying to forward along the content that we think would be useful and interesting to people. Right, Julie?
Yep. Always. There's always new stuff.
Yep. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
Be well.